Today, our guest speakers are going to talk about introducing the carbon farming project in Utah. Here are the logistics. The recording of the webinar will be available on this platform, and feel free to submit the questions at any time using the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. And for people who are looking for the CCA CEU credits, it will be offered in the end of the session. There will be a QR code. Feel free to scan that. And the driving force behind the CFORM is Dr. Ratan Lal. Dr. Ratan Lal is a distinguished university professor at Soil Science, School of Environmental and Natural Resources uh, at the Ohio State University. And he's well known for the 2020 World Food Prize and 2021 Padma Shri award from India, and also 2024 Gulbenkian Prize for Humanity. He is working on soil carbon sequestration, conservation, agricultural and soil functions, and soil physical processes and properties. He has been, uh, he has been a great force for SENR in Ohio State University. And today's speakers, Dr. Matt Yost and Dr. Jennifer Reeve. Dr. Matt Yost is a native of southern Idaho, where he was raised as a where he was raised on a dairy farm and developed an early appreciation for the agriculture and outdoors. Currently, he's working as a professor and interim department of head and the agroclimate extension specialist in the plants and soils and climate department at the Utah State University. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Yost. And Dr. Jennifer Reeve, she's also working as a professor on organic and sustainable agriculture in the Department of Plant, Soils, and Climate at Utah State University. Thank you both for joining us. I will stop sharing my screen here, and our guest speaker, Dr. Yost, will start his presentation.
Okay. Can you see, which screen can you see? The full version or the split one? Does it look okay?
We're seeing the split version, the speaker
Yes.
profile.
Split version. Okay, let me see if I can change the screen really quick. See the full version now?
Yes. We can see Dr. Yost.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about Utah and agriculture and soils and what we're doing in the CFARM project here in Utah. So I'm going to give you an introduction to Utah agriculture, and then Jennifer will tell you all about our CFARM work here in the state. One thing you need to know about Utah agriculture, it's very diverse. It's a beautiful state with lots of diversity in topography and geography and agricultural systems and soils. We raise a lot of different crops. The major crop that we produce is a perennial alfalfa and grass hay. It's almost 75% or greater of the acres that we farm in the state. We also grow a lot of grain crops. Wheat, corn, and barley are our top grain crops, and then safflower, fruit, various kinds of fruit, and then oats, another small grain, and other types of crops. In total, we farm a little over 1 million acres of irrigated cropland, and then we use another roughly 10 million acres of land to graze cattle and sheep. What puts Utah on the map? Here's a couple of our claims to fame. We're the 11th, usually about the 11th top producing state of alfalfa in the United States. We're second for tart cherry production. It's our largest fruit crop. And we're fifth for safflower production. Livestock is a huge part of Utah agriculture. Cattle is our #1 industry in terms of receipts and sales from agriculture in the state of Utah. We're also the second top producing state of mink in the country, and fifth for sheep and lamb production. A few other things about Utah agriculture that make it unique is that we have a lot of small and medium-sized operations still in the state of Utah. Makes up a large percentage of our farms and ranches. Roughly 70% of the people that work in agriculture in Utah also work off the farm. So it creates some interesting dynamics for us, but also a lot of opportunity for diversity. Utah also has quite a range in elevation in our state. If you've ever flown over or visited, you learn that pretty fast. We've got some large mountain ranges that go through much of the state, and that causes just a wide variation in growing seasons. Our growing seasons around the state can vary almost 120, 130 days between different spots. So it's creates a lot of unique challenges. We've got valleys with longer growing seasons, and then upper valleys, high elevation areas with really short seasons, where it may just be a few months, where they may get frost in July and sometimes in September. So it creates a lot of diversity and some different challenges for our farmers and ranchers. We're small, but we're mighty in terms of some of the agricultural land that we have. We produce a lot of food products that are common. We had a meeting here, a CFAR meeting here a few weeks ago in Utah, and I showed this slide and I asked who has consumed one of these products in the last week. I think almost every hand went up in the audience. So lots of unique and impactful food products that come from Utah agriculture. I wanted to show you kind of a visual of where we farm and ranch in the state. If you look on the right, here's a cropland data layer map, and you'll see the brighter colors represent crop production. Pink is one that you might notice the most of. That's alfalfa, our dominant crop. And then there's some brown and orange, kind of hard to see. It's not a high resolution, but those represent corn and wheat acres. So you'll see the areas that we farm are mostly in the valleys, the lower elevation spots where we have a longer growing season and more access to irrigation and better soils. Our livestock production happens in almost every area of the state. A little bit about water. Water, as I mentioned earlier, is the driver of agriculture in our state. We are an arid state. By some metrics, we're the second driest state in the country. And so we rely heavily on irrigation to support our crop production. The map on the left just shows some of our major water sources and basins. We've got the Great Salt Lake Basin in the northern part, the Colorado River Basin in the eastern half of our state, and then some other areas. We rely almost exclusively on surface water in many parts of the state. There are some areas where it's partially or solely groundwater-based irrigation, but surface water is a huge source for us. So snowpack is critical and something that we watch very closely. The map on the right just shows where that agriculture happens, where irrigation occurs in the state of Utah. And you can see that there's some pockets of large irrigated acres in several parts of the state. How do we irrigate? We still have the majority of our irrigated acres are surface. I shouldn't say majority, over half is still surface irrigation, different types of surface irrigation. We are seeing an increase in sprinkler irrigation, mainly in pivots, center pivots. So if you look on the bottom chart and the blue lined bars, you'll see that over time we've seen a pretty sharp increase in center pivot irrigation. like many areas of the Western United States. One thing that we struggle with is water. Water scarcity has been and will always be a challenge for us. We've had intense and severe droughts in the last five years, worse droughts than we've ever had, and it's causing a lot of concern and a lot of challenges about how we use water in the state, how much is used in agriculture and how much is used in urban areas. I'll share just a couple thoughts about some of the major issues. We're fortunate, I guess you could say, in Utah to have two massive challenges when it comes to water. One being the Great Salt Lake. You've probably heard about it in the news if you've watched it the last 4 or 5 years. The Salt Lake back in 2022 reached the lowest level ever on record and caused a lot of deep concern about the health of the lake, the future of the lake, environmental concerns, human health concerns with all of us who live around the lake. And so there's a lot of pressure and attention on agriculture to use less water to help preserve the lake. The other, if one issue was not enough, we're also very dependent on the Colorado River. About half of the irrigated acres in our state are supplied by the Colorado River. Massive issues and challenges on this basin as well. If you've seen the news recently, all of the states that are involved in the Colorado River Basin are currently negotiating new compacts, new agreements going forward, and it's likely that there'll be some cuts in Utah's portion of the water that's allocated in the basin. So enough about some of the water challenges. Let's talk a little bit about soils. I'll just tell you a few things about Utah's soils. Here's a soil map. You can see we've got large diversity in soil types, parent materials across the state of Utah. A lot of our farmed area is the dark brown mollisol soils, but we also have a mix of others in different parts of the state. I'm going to just show you a few metrics of our soils here. One being organic matter. We're generally quite low in most of our cropland, usually under 3% organic matter. When we get to our pasture, long-term pasture systems and some crop systems or really diversified gardens, we can see organic matter get 3, 4, 5, 6% in some cases. But on a lot of our soils, we're looking at around 2% organic matter. Active carbon, a fraction of organic matter that's more sensitive to change. We see similar trends here, somewhere in about the 500s for a lot of our systems. Pastures, though, really shine here. We see a lot of increase in active carbon in our pasture systems. CO2 respiration, measure of biological activity, potential of the soil. Again, really similar in a lot of our systems, below 100 when measured in the spring. But in a pasture, we see much higher biological activity in those undisturbed soils. A couple of things that we're looking at here is just trying to understand better what metrics of soil health and carbon are important for arid calcareous soils like we have in Utah. So we've started to look at just variation in some common metrics in space and in time. I just wanted to show you this is in space. So it's in a pasture, actually a couple pastures. We took samples at different spots right next to each other just to see what kind of variation we had in some metrics. A lot of them were below about 20% variation in space, which was good. There's some that were a little bit higher. Just highlighted one here, ACE protein, fractional organic matter, getting close to 30%. And then another one that kind of stood out was aggregate stability, very small variation in space, which is a really good thing if we're trying to understand soil health. Variation in time. I've got more metrics here, all the chemical properties, physical and biological properties. Here, A little more concerning, this is the same alfalfa field, no change in management. We sampled it 3 years in a row, same spots. And from year to year, we could see 60, 70, 80% variation in some of the metrics, organic carbon, respiration, which is a lot. That's a lot of variation in time with no change in management, which means it's going to be difficult to track changes and improvements in those properties with so much variation. Some good signs is that we do have some metrics that are much lower. POX carbon, active carbon, was below 20% variation in time. Aggregate stability, again, really shined here, below 10% variation in time. So very, very stable, I think, metric of soil health for arid soils like we have here. I just close with a couple thoughts about soil health in Utah. There is a lot of interest, a lot of experimentation by farmers to try different things to improve Utah's soils, which is really encouraging. When you look at our metrics nationally, we rank pretty low, near the bottom, in terms of adopting and using some of the soil health practices like no-till and cover crops. Much of this is related to just how we use our land. As I showed you before, 3/4 of our land is used for perennial crop production, alfalfa and grass hay, which doesn't require much tillage and doesn't provide as much opportunity for cover crops because we're already covering the soil in most cases. So I think that's why we rank pretty low. But there is still a lot of interest in cover crops and no-till, and a lot of experimentation, people trying to incorporate it into our perennial-based systems. So there's a lot of opportunity. We've tried to understand soil health as well in Utah. We've asked farmers to share their experience. There's a lot here, so I don't expect you to digest it all. But we surveyed over 500 farmers, asked about soil health. I'll just mention one or a couple of things here. Most feel it's important. Most feel like they're doing a pretty good job at managing their soil health. A lot are worried about what others think when they're trying to improve their soil health. About half are tired of hearing about soil health. That was interesting. And about half still feel it's too difficult to implement soil health. So there's lots of attention and use of soil health, but still some challenges that we've got to overcome. Also, we surveyed the advisors, people that advise farmers. We asked them about what they're recommending, what they perceive are the barriers to soil health for their farmers and ranchers, and found some really interesting things in this. I'll just highlight one here, just showing what kinds of practices are recommended by different groups of advisors. You'll see that there's differences in the private industry, NRCS, Extension, Department of Agriculture. There's some common threads. A lot are recommending conservation tillage, some diversified crop rotations, and some cover crops, but really a different approach from different types of groups. So in summary here, lots of challenges for Utah in terms of soil, water, food security for our state. What's really exciting is that there are a lot of discussion about new opportunities, new markets for water, new markets for carbon, and how that could help us deal with some of these really, really complex issues that we have to try to address drought, water scarcity, and other issues that we face. Thank you. I don't know if we want to take questions now or just maybe move to Jennifer's presentation and we can discuss at the end.
I think that works. Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dr. Yost, very much. So if you have questions, go ahead and drop those into the Q&A, and we'll go ahead and move forward here with Dr. Reeves' presentation. So just a quick recap, if you weren't with us here for the introductions, Dr. Reeves is currently a professor of organic and sustainable agriculture with Utah State University in the Department of Plant, Soils, and Climate. Her research focuses primarily on nutrient management, soil health, and carbon cycling in organic and integrated small grain, pasture, vegetable, and fruit systems. So 20 years experience working on interdisciplinary research projects focused on organic systems is a highlight for her. And she also teaches classes in organic agriculture and ag ecology, and is the faculty mentor for the Utah State University Student Organic Farm. So welcome, Dr. Reeve. Take it away.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here this morning or this afternoon, depending where you are in the country. So yes, I am the co-lead with Dr. Yost on the Utah portion of the CFARM project that's headed up by Dr. Lal. And I thought, let me see, I think I also need to turn to presentation mode.
Presentation mode. Well, there you go.
Yeah, I thought I'd selected that, but it doesn't transfer. Okay. So thank you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we are doing for the CFARM project in Utah specifically. So again, it is a multi-state project headed up by Dr. Lal. And the goal is to gather soil carbon data and soil health data as well in response to management on working farms. And so in order to do that, we select fields on the same soil type with different management systems and histories and length of time in that management system. So first of all, why soil carbon? Well, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this kind of figure. As soil carbon increases over time, soil quality or soil health also tends to increase, as well as a host of other soil properties. So soil aggregation, soil water infiltration, water nutrient holding capacity, productivity is also often associated with improved soil health, and as well as environmental quality, water quality, and air quality. So I like to show this figure, courtesy of my former advisor at Washington State University. So contrary to what it would immediately appear, the vial of soil on the right, your right, has higher soil organic matter. And that's because, so both the same amount of soil with the same soil type was put into water, shaken up and allowed to settle. And if soil with higher organic matter tends to have better aggregate stability, and the soil particles bind together, and then they settle out much faster than when you have low soil organic matter. And this has real consequences for both soil health and erosion. So this is another way of looking at that same idea. This was actually from a study that John conducted, 2 cornfields side by side on the same soil type. The one on your right had a history of cover crops and manure use, and the one on your left did not. And so he just dug up the corn root system and sprayed water on those systems for the same amount of time, and the one with lower soil organic matter washed away much faster. So soil carbon, soil organic matter is really, really important for soil health. However, it makes a huge difference, right? Where you are in the country, what your landscape is, whether you're high elevation, low elevation, whether your soil's formed under the Great Plains or in a desert, how much native soil organic carbon you have in your soil. And this is one of our big challenges in Utah, because we can have mollisoils that look, like this range, right? We can have nice dark surface soil, especially at low elevation. Here you can see soil carbonate, little globules in the bottom. That's very common to have a lot of soil carbonate with high pH. But also we have these very sandy soils, poor development with calcareous sublayers underneath, right, that are concretized or cemented. So it really does depend where you are. And so it can be difficult to apply the soil health concept over these kinds of landscape differences. So given that, right, if we want to figure out on a landscape level how management affects soil health, we have to control for soil type. So this is just a figure illustrating how we do that. So this is the NRCS soil map laid over a Google Earth image, and the faint yellow lines indicate the supposed or estimated borders of the different soil types. So here we have a Leighton fine sand, loamy fine sand on the right, and then there's a Kidman fine sandy loam on the left. And then these are 3 neighboring farms in Cache Valley with different management systems. And so we, on the same soil type, we might select, for example, a grass pasture and compare that to, this was actually a shorter term grass pasture with a longer term grass pasture with a short-term alfalfa grain rotation and a short-term 8 years grass pasture with a previous history of an alfalfa grain rotation. So those are 3 different management systems on the same soil type. And here on the left, similarly, we can use some of the same fields for our comparison, an 8-year grass cattle system with a alfalfa grain system, a long-term grass system, and another alfalfa system. So we put out, calls over the radio and the internet, and we talked to a lot of extension agents, asking them, who do you know, who could we contact who might be interested in getting involved in this study? And then once we called them up and confirmed that they're interested, we would pull up a map like this and sit down and go through how, what fields do they have that are on the same soil type that might have a different management history. And that's what we've been doing all over Utah now for the past 3 years. Well, this will be our 4th year. So once we've selected our fields, we sample the fields, 5 cores at 3 locations and 3 depths, 0 to 10, 10 to 30, and 30 to 60 centimeters. And then we analyze this whole suite of soil properties. So bulk density, aggregate stability, texture, total and inorganic carbon, total nitrogen, soil respiration using a 72-hour incubation, nitrogen mineralization at day 0 and day 24, pH, electrical conductivity, and then a number of nutrients, extractable nutrients, as well as the cation exchange capacity of the soil. So this is a lot of work, even though there could be a lot more things we could manage, even just this, or measure, even just this relatively short list is a lot of work. So now I'm going to focus on these 3 questions. What are the site conditions that we tend to see in Utah? What were the management effects on total organic carbon? And what can we learn from trends in the soil and management data set? So this is the same map that Dr. Yost showed you earlier, and you can see we have sampled a range of sites, primarily along the mountain range that spans Utah from north to south. And we've sampled 5 different soil orders that have a varied geology, topography, climatic conditions. right? And all of these soils are very different. We've sampled 10 soil textural classes and 109 fields to date. In terms of the distribution of the different management systems, the majority of our fields are in pasture for different lengths of time. So we were really interested in how pasture, perennial grasses, could build soil organic matter over time and whether that tended to flatline, right, after a long number of years. So we have a lot of pastures in our system. Like Dr. Yost said, alfalfa grain systems are our #1 commercial crop. So we also have a lot of alfalfa fields or hay mix. We've also been sampling some native systems as undisturbed as we can find as a benchmark reference system. And then annual systems, small grains, corn, rotated perhaps with cover crops or alfalfa. It's been difficult to find pure corn or small grain systems that aren't rotated with alfalfa frequently. I think it's very typical for Utah growers to grow alfalfa for maybe 5 years, then go into small grain or corn for a couple of years, and then back into alfalfa. And so when we are listing these as corn or grain, they've been in corn for longer or grain for longer, so perhaps 10 years in an annual row crop or small grain. And so we've really been focusing this year on trying to boost the number of annual systems in our data set, but it is quite hard to find those in Utah because most people do grow alfalfa at some point in the rotation. This is the distribution of total organic carbon over the entire data set collected so far. And so you can see that most of the soils are fairly low in total organic carbon, and this is in grams per kilogram. And similarly, when you just compare systems over the entire state, you get a lot of variability. And so if you look at the top here, you might go, okay, yeah, pastures have more organic carbon than alfalfa grain systems. But this is actually, you know, representatives in these pasture systems that have as, you know, similar carbon levels to our alfalfa fields. So you really can't say that there's much difference, right, going on here. We just span this huge range. So what this means is that we really have to be a little bit more creative or in how we analyze our data. And so, for example, here, I'm just showing how soil properties influence our soil measurements, right? So the colored bars are different soil series. These ones are collected from northern Utah and Cache Valley. And so for total organic carbon, you can see there's a very strong upward relationship between soil series and total organic carbon, inorganic carbon, total nitrogen, and cation exchange capacity. That relationship breaks down somewhat when you look at pH, EC, and some of the nutrients. But this again illustrates how soil type is really driving the majority of the variation across the state. However, when you dial down into the farm level, at the soil type level, we do start to see interesting differences. So these are individual fields, again, soil organic carbon on the y-axis, and 2 different soil types on the x-axis, and 3 different management systems. So alfalfa, 3 to 5 years in yellow, grass short-term, and grass longer-term. And so you definitely see on the Kidman fine sandy loam, that the tillage in that alfalfa grain system tends to have lower carbon than the 2 grass systems. And then on the different soil type, there's no difference between the alfalfa and the short-term grass system, but the longer-term grass system has more soil carbon. Here's another farm, again in Cache Valley, that shows a similar relationship. The alfalfa grain system has the lowest soil organic carbon, followed by a grazed pasture with a history of light manure applied, and then 2 pastures, both long-term, with medium or heavy manure history. And so it seems that, you know, at least a medium rate of manure is needed to bump up that carbon further. Here's another one. Again, here we have a grass that's been in short term, a grass in mid-term, 19 years in grass, 25 years in grass. So here's one of our grass Cronus sequences. But then on a different soil type, this really broke down, and we did not see much of a relationship at all. Here we have an annual system. This one had been in a grass long-term, but had recently been tilled and planted to triticale. So no difference between the annual system and the long-term grass at this site. And then the highest organic carbon, the field with the highest organic carbon, was a short-term grass pasture. So this illustrates some of the challenges that we're facing when we're trying to figure out what's going on, even at the farm and soil type level. And so we collect a lot of data from the growers on management histories to try and make sense of this. For example, perhaps this, you know, this was a newly planted grass pasture. Perhaps there was a fairly heavy rate of manure applied prior to seeding that. Or perhaps the annual crops were highly fertilized or prior to going into pasture. Perhaps some of these longer-term grass sites were more marginal, right? It's the same soil type, but perhaps they were more marginal to start with, and that's why they had lower soil organic carbon. And then the other challenge that we're facing is that the soil maps are not particularly accurate, right? The soil maps are estimates. They're not based on a lot of ground truthing. They're often just based on a single head-on description. And then that is extrapolated across the landscape. And so here you can see an example of the soil textural triangle with the different fields sampled. So each of these dots represents 15 cores taken from one field. So each blue dot is a different field, supposedly on the same soil type. And here, even though it was similarly mapped, the texture analysis that we conducted in our lab show that the textural distribution spans several soil types. Some of them are quite good, like these pink ones here. They're all clustered within the same soil textural class. But others, there's quite a bit of variability. So obviously this is going to feed into some of these results too, right? When we have these situations that the management intensity and the soil organic carbon doesn't line up very well. So we've also, and I think I'll cut some of this short, but we've also tried to use more formal statistical analysis to try to get a sense of how we can predict relationships between management history and soil carbon. We've used several different approaches. And this is a regression approach. And all this is that you choose a reference site. So the red dot is a reference site. And then the more intensive systems like the alfalfa grain or annual grain systems are listed below that. And the more extensive like the pastures and with manure are listed above that. So you can see the change from the reference site, either in the direction of more carbon or less carbon. And so basically what this shows is that there's a lot of variability based on soil type. In some soils, grass pastures lead to quite a substantial increase in soil organic carbon, but in other soil types, they don't. We've also been working with what's called a principal component analysis design to try and better differentiate between environment and environmental variables and our measured soil indicators and management. So these are the different qualitative and quantitative variables that we included in our principal components analysis. We have the different crops, time, short, medium, long-term management, fertilizer or organic matter inputs. We group those together so far in the same category, and soil texture class. And then the quantitative variables we're putting into the model are organic carbon, total nitrogen, CEC, bulk density, electrical conductivity, clay, and pH. And the principal component analysis basically breaks out all the variability in the data set and clusters it together. And so here you can see that this first component explains about 40% of that variation, 48% of that variation, and then the different components explain decreasing amounts, the variation within that total data set. And so what do these components represent? So here on dimension 1, which is the first one, you can see that it's mostly those intrinsic soil properties, like total nitrogen, bulk density, organic carbon, EC. But on the second dimension, you can see inputs really breaking out and explaining a lot of the variability in our data set, while management or the system is important to both. So this is a really interesting approach. We're just starting work on this. So this is really early data, but just to give you a sense of where we're going to go with this. I'm just going to skip over this, but just that they cluster, right? That the different fields tend to cluster together into native uncultivated soils, sandy soils, soils with inputs, and grass, hay, and pasture. So to conclude, what we're seeing is a major influence of soil type, right? That inherent fertility of the soil as well as the texture. But nested within that, we are seeing an effective management, right? With longer, less intensive rotations with inputs tending to increase total organic carbon. But there's definitely interaction of management and soil type with, sorry, I can't see, similar practices have different outcomes across soil types. And that's what we're going to have to come to grips with as we start to try to predict how management is going to influence organic carbon in the future. So the next steps, we have additional soil depths to analyze. The data I shared with you is just based on the surface soils. We have more fields to analyze. And then we are going to try and use the data to ground truth carbon process models so that we can hopefully get a better sense of or better ability to predict how management can affect soil carbon on any given farm. So a big thank you to our farmer collaborators, funding sources, students and lab technicians. A lot of help went into collecting this data, and our sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reeve. Excellent. Thank you also to Dr. Yost for presenting today. There are some questions presented here in the Q&A, so we can move to that discussion. And so this first question, I believe, is for Dr. Yost. Alan Franz-Lubers from USDA in Raleigh has a comment here. It says, nice overview of agriculture in Utah and describing the challenges and opportunities. It says, are some farmers using pasture crop rotation in their long-term management, or are cattle ranchers only having perennial grass and crop farmers only having crops and not rotated with alfalfa or other forages?
Well, thanks for the question, Alan, and nice to hear from you. Most of our farms are mixed farms with crop production and livestock. It's very common for many of our producers to have livestock, and so because of that, there's a mixture of crop production, forages for harvest and feeding of animals, and then there's a lot of grazing, either grazing kind of irrigated pasture land or grazing rangeland, where we have just a large portion of our land is used for rangeland grazing. So that's common. Most have a mixture of both.
Alan, do you have any follow-up? Would you like to have any conversation?
No, thanks. Thanks for the answer. And of course, I heard Jennifer say also that there was plenty of a rotation between alfalfa and cropping systems. So great to hear that there's some mixed cropping and livestock. Thank you.
Yeah, most of our alfalfa stays in production for anywhere from 4, sometimes up to 8, 9, 10 years, just depending on the use.
Dr. Doug Jackson-Smith from OSU here had a question as well. What management practices would you recommend for promoting soil health in perennial hay or forage systems? Or asked differently, aside from soil properties or type, what management methods differentiate high and low soil health indicators within pasture or alfalfa fields?
Lots of questions there.
Yeah, I know.
First, with the perennial system, it gets challenging. There's not as many options. One thing that is happening is we're looking at some diversity. So we've got a lot of farmers experimenting with annual forages interseeded into alfalfa. What's really common has been a small grain forage that's seeded in the fall, something like triticale or a 3-way mix of small grain forages. And then they'll let that come up in the spring, get a really big first cutting of the small grain and alfalfa, and then continue with alfalfa production throughout the rest of the season. And so we've doing some experimentation on that. It seems like it's doing really well. It's adding some diversity, different types of roots, adding some biomass for the farm, and so far not hurting the alfalfa, at least that we can measure. So that's one option. Irrigation management is another one that just has a huge impact on soil health. The more water we have in a soil, generally, the better its health. And so a lot of focus on just trying to improve water management, to improve soils. To your second questions, Doug, we're still trying to understand. As I showed there, we have a lot of metrics for soil health that are common to all places in the country. We're still trying to learn what they mean for Western soils, not just in Utah, but across the West. Very arid, calcareous soils in a lot of places. By a lot of ratings, they're really poor in terms of soil health. But when you look at services that we get from our soils, they're quite high and they're quite productive. And so, yeah, trying to learn which metrics are most important and where for what types of systems. So there's some progress to be made there. As far as pastures go, Generally, they're higher in soil health because there's much less disturbance, more integration of livestock, and more diversity in some cases. And so some of the focus there has been on just more diversity. A lot of farmers trying different mixes, legumes and different types of legumes mixed with grasses, and trying to add diversity to pastures to help them be more persistent and keep better cover. There's also been a really big focus on rotational grazing and more adaptive grazing management to make sure we're not overdoing it with our pastures, to keep the soil healthy and hopefully improving over time. So Jennifer, I don't know if you'd add anything there.
Thank you. That was a great summary. I would just add that I think in our initial analysis there, that including some inputs seems to be very important for soil carbon and soil health. I think sometimes there's the perception that if you have a pasture, right, there's no need to fertilize it because you're going to have good soil health because of the perennial forages. But at least our initial analysis there suggests that some manure and or fertilizer inputs can help as well.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you to Dr. Yost and to Dr. Reeve. And I'm happy to say Dr. Law has made it. We have rescued him from the technical challenge. Yay! Let me just give kudos here to Dr. Law. He is our distinguished university professor of soil science. He's also our director for the CFAS, the Rattan Law Carbon Center for Carbon Management and Sequestration, fondly known to those of us at Ohio State as CMASC. He served as president of both the Soil Science Society of America and the International Union of Soil Sciences. And many of us know that his research has been focused on soil carbon sequestration, conservation, agriculture, soil function, physical process, and properties. I've had the opportunity to work with Dr. Law. We just finished a 5-year project here in my county through a privately funded partnership. To where we looked at the management, soil health management on local farms, local small farms here. But Dr. Law, as you know, has thousands of citations, research papers. He's very active, and he is a recipient of the 2020 World Food Prize, the 2020 Padma Shri Award, and most recently, the 2024 Gulbenkian Prize for Humanity. So Dr. Law, please feel free to speak. Yay.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you, Heather and Asmita and Prasanna. Greatly appreciate your effort in promoting the extension aspect of the FFAR. I also want to thank Jennifer and Dr. Yost. I heard everything. I was from the very beginning, but there was connection until now, just now it happened. I just want to take not more than 2-3 minutes. I want to tell something about historic evolution of the Carbon Center. In 1990, 35 years ago, it was established as Soil Carbon and Sequestration Program under OARDC, Ohio Agriculture Research and Development Center. In 1993, it was changed to Carbon Management and Sequestration Center. And then I was very privileged to receive in 2020 the World Food Prize when the administration was very kind to name the center as Ratan Lal Center for Carbon Management Sequestration. I want to briefly mention the mission. The mission has always been to evaluate and assess the carbon sink capacity and rate of carbon sequestration by adoption of best management site-specific practices in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems while promoting carbon farming as a solution to climate change adaptation mitigation. So that is our mission, which is kind of broad-based, established since 1990. The objectives have been, and I will list one by one major objective: develop biosequestration technology in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem. I want to mention terrestrial That's soil and trees, and aquatic means wetlands. Assess sequestration of soil organic and inorganic carbon, both, which Utah, being arid climate, has inorganic carbon as well. Evaluate economic viability and social acceptability of these interventions. Address policy issues and human dimensions of technology transfer. That's where Heather's participation today is very critical, as is of Asmita and Prasanna. Number 5, develop linkages with private sector and agro-industry. And I'm hoping that one day we will have a participation of a private sector colleague. Number 6, promote workshop and short courses, well, like today's. And we also run Carbon Academy for undergraduate students, graduate students, postdoc, extension, farmers, and we plan to continue doing that. And we want to develop linkages with national and international programs. For example, ICA, and we have project in Uruguay and others. And our goal is to save land, water, and inputs for nature by improving efficiency of inputs and reducing the waste. Our key stakeholders are primarily farmers and managers, and that's where our extension part is very critical. Government agencies, USDA, NRCS, ARS, researchers, private sector, especially private sector. We have colleagues from Bayer and other organizations working with us. And of course, we want to work with policymakers. I've been promoting the idea of soil protection policy and Soil Health Act. So that's a brief background of our center, and we are delighted to have strong cooperation with colleagues from not only FFAR, but other projects. And today's example is an excellent one of that cooperation. And Heather, I thank you personally for such a great job.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe.
Thank you.
If you have questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A, but we do want to be mindful of everyone's time. I'm going to share one last slide here quickly. Bear with me. I'm not sure. Are you guys seeing the full slide screen, or are you still seeing my speaker screen?
The speaker screen.
Yeah, you probably were seeing that before. Sometimes when I move things to two screens operating here today, so. Let me do this and do this. All right, how about now?
Yeah.
Now we're
I can
good?
see you on a full screen, yes.
Okay, full screen. All right, so final slide. In 2026, we're going to continue the fun. So if you've joined us today, there is a feedback survey that goes out to Dr. Murumkar and Prasanna Oruganti. So please make sure that you complete that feedback survey so that we can continue to improve our delivery of these programs. We thank you for your attendance. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that Dr. Yost, Dr. Law, or Dr. Reeves will get those and we can get them addressed.